today we have joining us two Rice alums, Brock Wagner, class of '87, who is Saint Arnold's founder and owner, joining us today, as well as Scott Birdwell, class of '75, the owner of DeFalco's Home Wine and Beer. And then you may have noticed on your tables that we have some Saint Arnold beer there for you. So we also have 4 little cups, so if you wanted to do a little tasting as they take us through the business and science behind brewing, we encourage you to open up and smell and take part and taste everything that we've got on the tables there for you and really just dive into this. So thank you, Brock and Scott, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to y'all.
So I guess first off, the business and science of brewing is much more interesting and a lot funnier if you're drinking the beer. So please don't wait. Oh, that's a happy. There's a happy down there. Yeah. This is full participation education here.
We are trying to save the planet, as this is the only planet we know that has beer. So Earth Day.
So I guess just kind of quickly going over my background and how I got here. So I actually started homebrewing while I was at Rice. So technically I am using my Rice education today. This is not what my parents thought I went to college for. But I actually bought my supplies from Scott at DeFalco when it was in the Rice Village. Next door to the Gingerman back in those days. And after college, I continued to homebrew. I had another unrelated career of which we shall not speak. But after doing that for about 7 years, I realized that my goal in life was to start a company. But I realized it needed to be what I was passionate about. And beer was what I was passionate about. I love to brew beer. I love to talk about beer. I love to drink beer, not always in that order. And so I quit my job and traveled the country. Houston was the largest city in the country that did not have a microbrewery back in those days. And so people drank a lot of beer in Houston. So that seemed like the logical thing to do. I loved Houston, huge beer market. I opened Saint Arnold and discovered that nobody here knew what craft beer was. So there was a lot of educating and trying to teach people about what it was that we were brewing, why this beer with flavor was so much better than the light fizzy swill that everybody was drinking. And after about 12 years, we were an overnight success. So now we're celebrating, we're about to turn 23. We've grown, we moved from our original location, which was out at 290 and 34th Street. And now we're in an old building that we bought and refurbished just north of downtown, right there on I-10, between 59 and 45. And we've really seen the craft beer world grow. 10 years ago in Houston, you could come visit us and you could tell people you've now visited all of the craft breweries in the greater Houston area. Today, there are, I think within Houston, there's about 20 and about 40 or 50 in the greater Houston metroplex area. So there's a few more today. But it's great to see how it's grown. We continue to be independent, which is very important to us, especially as the big brewers come in and try to buy up little breweries and try to claim that they are still craft breweries. They're not. And it's just fun to see how craft breweries have changed what we view as beer. 25 years ago, if somebody said, "What's your favorite beer?" that was code for, "Do you drink Bud, Miller, or Coors?" And a near religious debate would then ensue. Today, if you ask somebody, what kind of beer do you like? That means, do you like IPAs, or do you like Kolsch? Do you like Hefeweizen? Do you like a Pils? So we've really seen the world change in the last 25 years, and it's great fun to be a part of it. So some people have referred to me as the grandfather of Texas craft beer. I am not encouraging that title. Scott has that one.
Yeah, class of 75. Yeah, I can do the math. Yeah, I'm working on 40 years at DeFalco's now, and I'm still waiting for my overnight sensation. So, but when I started at DeFalco's, there not only wasn't any craft beers in Houston, there weren't really outside of Anchor. There was no craft beers because even I'm trying to think of it because they're long gone in Sonoma that opened up.
Oh, New Albion.
New Albion, exactly. And that was the first startup of a craft brewery in the country, and I think that was '79. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of change. And I spent a summer of 40 years ago in Europe, and everywhere I went, the beer was better than what I was accustomed to drinking here. I waited tables and discovered some better beer, but over there, the exposure was just, a few days in Germany, a few days in Czechoslovakia, as it was called, and wine as well. So I got back, and after kind of getting reestablished, I walked into DeFalco's, which was in the Rice Village. And it's been 40 years almost now since then, and I'm going to leave one of these days, probably in a casket. So, yeah.
But beer is actually a great confluence of art and science and marketing and everything that goes into running a business. I started off as a mechanical engineer in my studies, added economics, then I had a great summer job in mechanical engineering for 2 summers. Actually, a bit of foreshadowing was involved. One summer, my project was to try to develop a plastic beer bottle, which turned out to be much more difficult than you would think. And there's a reason you don't see plastic beer bottles still. But after a couple years of mechanical engineering, as good as it gets, I realized I did not want to do that. So I dropped that major and just stuck with economics. But the interesting thing is how much of my engineering and math and all those things that you say, I will never use these again in my life, that we actually use in brewing. It is, in fact, when we hire brewers, we tend to hire, we hire brewers who have no professional experience, that are home brewers, and we prefer actually mechanical engineers, because they're home brewers, they have that real, kind of the artistic and the curiosity and the passion for beer. But the engineering side means they have a lot of attention to detail, there's a huge amount of math involved, every single batch of beer that we make, you expect it to taste exactly the same. Well, when you're mixing agricultural products together and heating them up and trying to get different extractions and sugars and alpha acids and out of the malt and the hops, they don't come out at exactly the same rate every single time. So you're adjusting every single recipe on the fly so that the beer that sits on your table tastes exactly the same. So it's really interesting to, it's always fun for me when I talk to high school kids who maybe are glazing over about science. It's funny, when I talk to them about beer, you see their eyes open up a whole lot more. Say, really, I'm not here to sell you on drinking beer. Although when you do, please drink Saint Arnold. But from the business side, it's been a fascinating business also to watch it go from very much a small boutique craft operations to as we grow, we've all had to become much more professional. We finally hired an HR person this year. Fortunately, our culture has not changed yet. So, Bill O'Reilly still would not have made the cut at our brewery.
He needs a job.
He does need a job. Maybe Carbach will hire him. it has been fun to see, how the whole industry has developed, because a few years ago you saw a lot of breweries expand nationally and be very successful doing that. In the last few years, as the number of breweries has just exploded, the past 5 years, I think nationally it's gone from about 2,000 breweries to about 5,000 breweries. And the focus on local has become so critical to the consumer that nationally distributed breweries, craft breweries, are actually suffering. So Sam Adams and Sierra Nevadas are actually seeing their sales go down, while all the local guys are seeing their sales continue to grow. It's benefited people like us because we only distribute in Texas and Louisiana. And by the way, our goal is to grow and expand and sell our beer in Texas and Louisiana. So world domination is on the horizon for us.
It's a fierce competition for tap handles and pubs and shelf space.
Yeah.
It's not really brutal.
So how has it affected homebrewing to see all the breweries?
It's definitely had an impact. 4 years ago, we were probably peaking, and there's a lot of people that have been making beer for quite a while, but now instead of brewing beer every other week, they're brewing it once every 6 weeks or so, because there's an embarrassment of riches of good craft beer. You could probably find it from the brewery within 2 or 3 miles of where you live. So, oh yeah, it's had a big impact. So, shake it out, and then we've had all these shops open up in the last 4 years, I'd say, and they've opened up kind of as the U curve is beginning to go down on the downside, So they caught the boom at the wrong time. So
it's an interesting thing. The press desperately wants to write about the story about the death of craft beer, because it turns out that bad news sells. Like I had an interview it was about 6 months ago, I think, with one of the local TV reporters, because the Brewers Association, which is the craft brewers organization, had just come out and said that the growth of craft beer had slowed to now is only growing 9%, and on a much larger base. And so he kept asking me, so why are people drinking less craft beer? Well, actually, they're drinking more craft beer. They're just not we're not adding as many customers as quickly as we used to. So, but why is it going down? It's like,
part of that equation is that as the Karbachs get swallowed up by the big breweries, the numbers that Karbach has been brewing have been shifted from the craft brewery column to part of the column of the big breweries. So you see a shift in the statistics, but it's not necessarily that the barrels of beer had changed. It's
right.
It's a matter of reclassifying, and generally the ones they're buying are not the tiny little craft breweries. They're buying mid to bigger size. So that alone has had an impact.
Yeah.
So.
And by the way, if you're curious about the beers on the table, this is one of the great things about craft beers. If you imagine, people used to talk about, and I used to actually get phone calls where people would say, hey, can you come to my house and help us do a beer tasting? I was like, oh, sure, that'll be fun. He says, yeah, we want to taste, Bud Light, Miller Light, and Coors Light. Okay, let's not do that. But really, people will swear they can tell them apart, and you cannot. There actually are color differences, and that's the only way I could ever game the system and tell them apart. But if you look on the table, you have kind of a nice spectrum of different flavors. You have fancy lawnmower beer, which is a Kolsch, which is a style of beer native to Cologne. And if you're trying all the beers, I would actually recommend starting with that one, although hopefully by this point you're like waist deep in beer. But the nice thing about this beer is it's light, but there's actually a whole lot of, nobody would ever call it a hoppy beer, but there's actually a lot of noble hop in it. It's a very delicate hop. called Herzbrucker, which has this real light berry floral quality to it. But it's not bitter. You can drink it on a hot summer day. That's the name, by the way. Lawnmower beer was the name that homebrewers used to give to light beer. You'd open up a homebrewer's refrigerator, you'd see some homebrew, hopefully some Saint Arnold, and inexplicably the can of Old Milwaukee Light in the back corner. What's that doing in there? It's my lawnmower beer. It's what I drink after a hot summer day and mowing the lawn. Life is too short to ever drink bad beer. You only have one liver, so please use it wisely. So we came out with fancy lawnmower beer. Then the next beer to try would be 5 o'clock Pils. And this beer was very much inspired by my trips to the Czech Republic, when I go to do hop selection there. By the way, I have a very difficult life. But this is what a Pils will taste like if you go to the Czech Republic. So it's nice, it's got a nice malt flavor. It actually has a very good hop bitter to it. And it's brewed with Saaz hops. And the interesting thing about Saaz hops is every hop that we use in brewing has been essentially invented in the last 50 years. It's a hybrid of something, several different hops. In fact, a lot of the beers, like an Art Car IPA, a lot of those hops have been developed in the last 5 to 10 years. Saaz is the one hop that's never been hybridized. It goes back 1,000 years to when it was a wild hop. So I've always thought that's very cool about that hop. It has a kind of a nice earthy, spicy flavor to it. Art Car IPA, this is if you're a hophead. It's going to have big, bright, you'll get citrus and mango and peaches out of it. And all those flavors are coming from the hops. Also, there's a nice bitter. It's also about 7.2% alcohol, so it'll get you there. And then the final one, Raspberry AF, which we had to tell the feds that do label approval that AF stands for ain't fake. It was an internal working name. It was not supposed to become a public name. In case anybody doesn't know what AF stands for, it's a current phrase that I can't repeat in public. The A stands for as, so I'll tell you that much. This beer is actually probably the most technically difficult of our beers to make, because we take the wort, which is the unfermented beer, and rather than bring it to a boil, we actually cool it down and add bacteria to it to let it sour, lactobacillus. And so it sours, and that'll take about 48 hours. And once it sours, and we boil it, which kills all the bacteria, then we add the yeast, let it ferment. And then right at the end of fermentation, we add about $8,000 worth of raspberries and let it do a secondary fermentation. And then we package it. But people will taste it and tell me that it's sweet. I say, okay, I get it, taste it again. Think about it. Is there any sweetness to that beer at all? No. It's incredibly fruity, but it's actually very sour and tart. And it's also 3.7%, so it's actually very low alcohol. And it's 116 calories per 12 ounces, so it's actually low calorie, which is not why we did it. But when I found that statistic, I was, ladies, look at this. Diet beer.
Raspberry AF Light.
So, but I think if you taste those 4 beers, you will see just the spectrum, and this is just barely touching the world of beer styles out there. So we've come a long way from where we were 25 years ago. When I got into home brewing, actually 30 years ago was like 35 years when I got into home brewing, because you couldn't buy these beers. If you wanted to try them, you had to brew them yourself.
Yeah, and he was talking about being a hophead. You see on your table a little Ziploc of hops. These are an American-grown version of a British variety. If you want to open up the package and find, these are flowers. Sometimes people call these leaf hops. There are no leaves in these. They're actually dried flowers. Pull out a little flower, like so. Put it in the palm of your hand. Take your other palm and rub the two together. Get some heat going, and then stick it to your nose. And you just get this incredible burst of oil, essential oils from the hops. And the hops are added and boiled for, say, an hour. You're going to get bitterness out of them. But if you add it at the end of the boil, this is what you get. You get the aroma. So anytime you add hops to the wort, you're compromising. You're either going to get bitterness, or you're going to get aroma, or you're going to get some of both, but you're not going to get all of both. So hops are been commonly used for about 500 years in the Western world. Before that, people experimented with all kinds of different herbs and spices to flavor the beers. And initially, beer was made of 3 ingredients, primarily: malted barley, water, and yeast. And then they started trying to flavor it because, frankly, beer didn't keep very well. And so you're looking for something to kind of offset the sweetness of the malt, but also to kind of cover up maybe the fact that it wasn't in the best of shape. And hops add bitterness to the beer. That kind of balances the sweetness a bit. And they discovered that beers that were brewed with hops kept longer than beers that didn't have hops in them. So they discovered that hops actually have a natural preservative in them. And that tipped the balance firmly in favor of hops versus all these other sweet gale and myrtle bog and everything else are thrown in the beers. So for a while there in England, the hopped and the unhopped styles of beer existed. Ale was the unhopped version, beer was the hop version, and the English blamed the Dutch on the hopped beer. King Henry is quoted as saying that he didn't want any of that pernicious weed in his ale. Because of course, if you've always been drinking the sweet stuff and then you get the bittersweet, it's kind of jarring to the palate, you know. So
Were you allowed to, if you had less than 4 ounces of the pernicious weed?
yeah, that's right. That made it quite all right, and no longer a felony.
Oh wait, that's different, sorry.
Well, now that you mention it, hops are, I can't pronounce the word, but there are dilutions. Anyway, there are male and female hops. And like many things in life, the male hops are kind of worthless. All they're good for is fertilizing the females. And we only use female flowers in the brewing process. So, for when I first started working at DeFalco, I would have people come in and ask if we had hop seeds, because there was this, I think it was an urban myth that you could take the seeds and grow hops and then graft hop flowers onto marijuana rootstocks, and you get something that looks like hops, but smokes like pot. I've never heard of anybody succeeding on that. But if you'll also take a look at those grains over there, I brought 4 different kinds. The one that is labeled two-row pale malt, that's kind of your building block. That's what's going to comprise most of the fermentables in most beers. With wheat beers being a notable exception, but even wheat beers have a lot of this. Now, up until about 200 years ago, breweries would roast all of their grain to one level, and they would just toast a darker beer more than they would a lighter colored beer. And so about 200 years ago, during the Napoleonic Wars, this is where my history degree comes in, Britain started experimenting with ways to use less grain to produce the beer, and they discovered that if they took a small portion of the grain and roasted it much darker, where you didn't even get any fermentables out of it, and the rest was made up of that very pale malt, then you actually, because they started using hydrometers for measuring the density, and they discovered that you could get the same amount of alcohol and more or less a very similar flavor using much less grain. So it was much cheaper and much less energy intense, because you were only roasting the very dark stuff. So what I've got there is some pale malt. That's going to be your fermentables. The interesting thing about that pale malt is that it's still starch. It hasn't been converted into sugar. And if you will take some of that two-row pale and put it in your mouth and chew on it for a minute, don't swallow it, but chew on it for just about a minute, you have enzymes in your saliva that will actually convert the starches in that grain, and they'll convert them into simple sugars, and it will get sweeter as you chew on it. You're doing kind of a little mini mash. In fact, the Incans and the Aztecs used to make chicha by chewing on corn and then spitting it out, because the enzymes, again, in the saliva will break the corn down and turn it into sugar, which got fermented and make corn beer, chicha. Now the other grains are no longer starch. The one that's going to taste and smell the best is going to be the medium crystal. That's the one you want to open up, smell it, and start chewing on that. And that's already been put in a kiln and heated up enough to convert the starches into sugars. And then they heat it up a little more, and the sugars get caramelized. And that's why it's so sweet. And once you caramelize the sugars, those sugars are not going to ferment in the fermenter, so the sweetness will stay behind. The crystal malt is going to give you an amber tint to the beer. So, and then the next two up going to be the pale chocolate. You might throw in a little touch of that for like a brown ale. More of it, you have a nice porter, and then the roast barley is the espresso roast. Technically, this isn't even malted, but it's roasted. Guinness would be comprised of about 10% of that espresso roast malt in it, and that's where you get this intense roasty color and flavor from. Small amounts of it adds kind of an interesting ruby color to the beer. So it's like coffee beans. You can take a certain coffee bean and end up with different roasts of different coffees. So did you chew on that crystal malt? Did you get a little? People think grape nuts. Yep. Yep.
It is. You can make beer from your grape nuts. Do not make beer from Fruity Pebbles. We think that's how they made Miller Chill. So now everybody can make some beer at their table. Just get a little bit of hot water, and you're there. But I guess we can open it up for questions and see if we piqued any interest. Yes?
Do they grow hops in Texas? And if not, could we? Do we have the right?
We sell, in fact, we have rhizomes. So hops are cultivated from rhizomes, the root cuttings, and we do sell them. They do grow here. This is a pretty brutal climate because the nights are hot. We generally tell people to break the rules of growing hops, and that is to plant them where they get morning sun but evening shade. And you have got to water them religiously. But they will grow 6-8 inches in a day on a good day. They're like a weed, as King Henry pointed out. Yes. Sometimes people get these great plants and no hops the first year, no flowers. They feel like, oh, that was a bust. And then the next year they come back and they're just inundated with these things. You can either dry them with like a hair dryer and store them, or you can use a wet hop beer. You just brew a beer, throw them in at the end of the boil, or throw them into the fermentation, and you get a very herbal, I don't know, what would you call it? When you've done the wet hop beer.
Yeah,
You get a little chlorophenol.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a chlorophyll flavor, but it's a softer, it's a different hop flavor that you get. So
From the dry.
Basically, it's not the best climate, and you also need a certain amount of infrastructure around hop farming. You need to have dryers, which it's interesting. In Germany, every single hop farm will have its own little kiln for drying. In Yakima, there's big dryers that all the farmers come in and bring them to. There's some other issues, like with wet hops. When the hops are first harvested, you actually need to get them dried fairly quickly, because when you bale them up, there's some exothermic reactions that occur inside of them, and they will spontaneously combust. which occurs periodically, and you'll see spectacular fires.
Is that what wiped out that huge
Yeah,
warehouse?
in Yakima. Yeah. So, if you go into the big hop warehouses, they have all sorts of infrared sensors looking for any bales that are showing any signs of heat. So it's kind of an interesting little thing out there.
I don't think anybody's going to be baling hops.
Yeah.
You can grow them; they will grow here.
And then most brewers use pelletized hops because the hop flowers, like what you have, they're not particularly stable. They oxidize fairly quickly. So
they take up a lot of space.
Yeah, take up a lot of space. So we get them pelletized. They look like rabbit food, and those are very expensive, capital-intensive systems. So again, you need to have them located sort of in the middle of a big hop growing region. So.
How did you pick the name?
St. Arnold. How did I pick the name St. Arnold? So when I was trying to come up with a name for the brewery, I had all sorts of different names. I actually have a list of paper with all the name ideas I had. And it's funny, I check off the ones that other breweries have since used. But one day I was wondering, I was like, I wonder who the patron saint of brewers was. So I went and I did some research. And I discovered Saint Arnold. He was a great guy. He was the Bishop of Metz, which is on the French-German border from 612 to 629. And he was known for running around the countryside telling his parishioners, do not drink water. Water is bad. It was true back then. He said, drink beer. This is a gift of God. It is good. He was a very popular bishop. Because of that, he became the patron saint of brewers. His miracle was that after he finished being a bishop, he moved up into the mountains. The story is the mountains. I've seen it. They're hills at best. But to a monastery that his friend ran, and he had a little kind of leper colony, outcast colony that he ran. And he did that until he died in 640. Well, he was buried there at the monastery. And the people of Metz found out their beloved bishop had passed away. So they petitioned the church to have his body moved. They said, yeah, fine, take it away. So they have this pilgrimage through the mountains again. And along the way, they stop in the town of Champagnol. And it was a very hot day. 50 dirty-looking travelers already carrying one dead body come into the bar. And the barkeep only has enough beer to fill one mug. He explains the situation to them. Much to their surprise, they're all very well behaved. And they take that mug and they pass it around. Everybody takes a sip. Pass it around again and again. It never runs dry. True legend. So I was doing
this is how the beer bike race got started.
So I was doing my research on St. Arnold at St. Mary's Seminary at the library there, and two priests came over to me and said, "You're not one of our students, are you?" I said, "No, I'm not." "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm researching St. Arnold." I said, "Why?" "Well, I'm opening a brewery and I'm going to name it after him." They look at each other like, oh dear. So I start packing up the books and they say, "If you bring us beer, we'll help you." They actually offered to bless the brewery. There is a specific blessing for breweries. So.
Did they bless it?
One did come out and bless it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Can you say more about local versus homebrew versus local versus craft brewery, or these strict definitions?
So homebrew, there's a very obvious definition to that. It's brewed at your home by individuals, and homebrewers will make sometimes some of the most amazing beer you've ever had, and then there are some
Not so interesting.
yeah, one's best for the toilet. But craft beer, so the Brewers Association has come up with a definition that you can sort of argue different aspects of it. But basically, a craft brew is going to be a beer from a small independent brewery that's really focused on making flavorful beers. So independent is very important. We're not being owned by a large non-craft brewery. which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue these days. By the way, we've been approached by every single major brewery. I tell them all to bugger off. Actually, it's not actually true. I actually tell them $1 billion, and it's theirs. And then they go down the road and call Carbach instead. You know, and the flavorful part, it was interesting. It used to be the term was traditional in that you only use malt, hops, yeast, and water. And they were really trying to get about, the big breweries use rice and corn in their beer. And you know, craft breweries, for the most part, don't. But craft breweries start to put all sorts of other stuff that is not really very traditional. Raspberries are not really traditional outside of maybe some of the Belgian beers. But you know, there are craft breweries out there that kind of go to the kitchen spice cabinet and open it up and say, what might fall into my next batch of beer? And that's kind of the cool thing. I'm not actually, personally, that's not kind of my brewing philosophy. I sort of stick to the main things, but we periodically go off the reservation and we use something. I will say that one of my big things is any beer that we brew, you have to want to drink a pint of it, and then you want another. Not saying you should have another, but you want another. But I guess, so back to your definition, so small, independent, traditional, that's a big thing of a craft brewery. And then if you're owned by a bigger brewery, then you're no longer a craft brewery, you're just part of a mega brewery. So.
And local would be, you'd have to be able to access it relatively easily by car or something,
Yeah, I would say it's interesting.
An hour to 2 hours.
Yeah, local has different things. Like
Yeah.
we do pretty well throughout Texas because we own sort of a spot that nobody else owns, which is we are Texas's oldest craft brewery. And please note, I say we are the oldest, we are not the first. There were several that came before us. We just outlasted them. Again, it was pretty challenging in the 1990s selling craft beer. But we do well with that throughout Texas, but I see that other craft breweries have a tough time in Dallas translating to Houston and vice versa. So,
And I think that's the local thing.
Yeah,
you get the local buzz going for
yeah.
it.
There was a period, Real Ales in Blanco, not far from Austin, and for years they were considered an Austin brewery by the people who lived in Austin. There was a period a couple years ago where people were like, yeah, Real Ale is not local to us. I think they've gotten over that again. But they're actually celebrating their 21st birthday today.
Yeah, and they make really great beers.
Yes. So, and Brad, who owns them, used to work for us. Actually, we have seeded lots of other breweries throughout the state, which is kind of cool.
You talked about a European tradition of beer. Are there traditions of beer in other parts of the world?
Oh yeah, I mean, basically every country has their own brewing tradition. I mean, at least all the countries worth visiting. Sorry if you're having to go to Saudi Arabia.
There's a tradition there too.
Yeah.
I deal a lot with those people.
Yeah,
brewing near beer with sugar and baking yeast. Yes.
The Middle East, they're not allowed to drink beer. There's a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. Coincidence? Just saying.
What's the consequence of like the big beer companies buying the smaller ones? Is there a threat there, or is it?
Yeah, there's a big threat.
What is that? What is that like?
So the threat it's a little more complicated than you might realize. What they're trying to do is restrict our access to market. So what their strategy is, like, just to be specific, so when Anheuser-Busch, InBev, the giant Brazilian, Belgian thing that now has bought South African breweries as well, when they bought Carbach, their goal was to be able to go to our distributor, which is Silver Eagle. So Silver Eagle also distributes all the ABI products. So it's sort of jarring the first day when we signed with Silver Eagle and there was a giant Bud Light truck at our dock. He's like, ah! So I just tell people Bud Light pays for the trucks that carries our beer. But you know, Silver Eagle is an independent distributor, so their goal is to be able to go to Silver Eagle and say, hey, you know, sell all this Bud Light. I know you guys that craft beer is really important to you, because for distributors, craft beer, that's where their growth is. The big beers are declining. So they see the handwriting on the wall. It says, well, now we're giving you a craft beer, so don't sell Saint Arnold and other local breweries. And they'll let them have a couple of other, like really tiny breweries that aren't really a particular threat to them at all. But so they want them to not focus on selling our beer. So that's kind of what their end game is. Fortunately, you know, distributors like Silver Eagle are basically telling them, no, that's great.
No, the guys at Silver Eagle, I have dealings with them through my wife, and they're not stupid. They know where things are going. And just Karbach is a good example, because they've had an immense pushback locally since the announcement that AB has taken over. Now, in the long run, they'll be fine, because they're going to be selling beer in markets that they're not in right now. But right now, there's been a giant pushback. So the people at Silver Eagle, they see that. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
Water quality, real or hype?
Water quality is real.
Yeah.
Water, you know, beer is basically about 95% water. The mineral content and stuff is very important. Like, we actually get City of Houston water, same great stuff that comes out of your taps, has about 350 parts per million dissolved solids. We then run it through reverse osmosis, and we take it from 350 ppm down to 0.5 ppm. So it's pretty much pure water. At that point, we actually add minerals back to it, because we need minerals in it. You know, calcium is the biggest one, but there's several other trace minerals. You know, depending on our beer, we'll be somewhere between 50 to 100 ppm on the calcium side, and then there's other things. You know, do we want more sulfates? Do we want some chlorides in there? The carbonates you never really want. But so every one of our beers has its own water recipe. But yeah, water is important. Now, if a brewery is spending a lot of time talking about the water, that's probably because that's what it tastes like.
Certain styles of beer were developed in certain regions because the water there was ideal for making that style of beer. They may not have known it, but I'm sure they made different styles of beer, and this is the one that worked well. But these days, when you can strip the water down to nothing and build it back whatever you want, you can take Houston water and make it Dublin water, make it Munich water, make it Rocky Mountain spring water. I mean, whatever you want, because it's just a matter of adding the minerals back to it. Basic water.
With respect to the laws that govern your business, I guess state laws in particular, are you all on a level playing field these days? I know you've made some progress over the years. There's still a lot of work to be done in that regard.
So years ago, people would ask me, like, what would I do differently? You know, that was kind of a typical question about the business. I said, my answer was, I would not have opened Saint Arnold in Texas, because the laws here really, you know, it's interesting for a state that prides itself on being pro-business. That is not the case when it comes to beer. The wholesale lobby, the distributor lobby here is very powerful, and they basically try to write the law so they have to do as little as possible. They have a cash cow. For example, once we sign with a distributor, we cannot fire them. They have our brand for life. They could be the most miserable business partner in the world. We cannot get rid of them. Now, technically, they'll say, well, yeah, you can, because if you do all these things, it's like, from a practical standpoint, we cannot fire them. They, on the other hand, can fire us anytime they want. So it's an interesting marriage that you get into.
And you can, as a brewery, if you're self-distributing, which you can do up to a certain level, you can't sell the rights to distribute your beer to a distributor.
Although that's actually gotten struck down.
Yeah, well, they keep running these things through. It's like, so it's not worth anything to a brewer, but once the distributor has it, it's worth big bucks. So
They'll
how does
actually
that
sell
work?
it. Yeah, they'll actually sell it to a different, your rights to a different distributors.
They didn't sign with Silver Eagle to begin with.
Yeah, no, yeah. Silver Eagle bought our distribution rights from Glazers for a lot of money. We got none of that. We did get a package of bills through in 2013. There was a big deal that now allow us to sell beer direct to the public for consumption there at the brewery. So you can come buy a pint of beer from us, but we still can't sell you a 6-pack of beer to take home, which we're one of the very few states where that is the case. And distributors really have, they're very powerful because they are essentially, because of the franchise laws, like banks look at that cash flow as a guaranteed cash, like an annuity. I mean, they can borrow money at like government rates. That's how valuable those franchise laws are to them. And because of that, they spend a lot of money on lobbyists. And you know, we have become a much more potent voice at the Capitol here. But the problem is we don't write anywhere near the checks that they do for all the politicians. And it turns out, if you write big checks to politicians, apparently it influences the process. I'm just weird.
If you're running your water through an hour filter, does it matter what goes into it? I mean, Mexico makes some very good beer, and no beer accused them of any good water.
Yeah, pretty much if you RO your water, the other thing is you're boiling it too, so that also sterilizes it. So yeah, in Mexico, drink the beer, don't drink the water.
What's the next big thing for Saint Arnold?
The beer garden that we're building next door, if we can ever complete our utility project by the street, which is has been an ongoing, very slow process. But hopefully we'll have that done here in the next couple months, and then we already have our plans into the city. We took a Rice architect has designed our building for us, so you got to keep it all in the family. So hopefully about a year from now we'll have a beautiful beer garden with nice views of downtown that you can come enjoy our beer and everything.
Wasn't there some sort of a bill that's in the legislature now that deals with tasting rooms or something like that?
Yeah, and getting a little bit into the weeds, but ABI bought Carbach and Miller Coors bought Revolver outside, which is Granbury outside of DFW. And the distributors are now trying to say that Carbach and Revolver shouldn't be allowed to have their tap rooms still because they're owned by a big brewery, because they didn't write the bill correctly before and say that was the legislative intent of the previous bill. That wasn't actually the case because I actually brought it up to the lobbyists that you realize that Anheuser-Busch could actually open a brew pub on 6th Street in Austin if they wanted, given the current bill. I said, yeah, but they're just not going to do that. But now it's actually become an issue, so now they're trying to claw it back. So the bill's not constitutional as it's currently written because you can't take away rights in Texas, or you can't take away value, I should say, in Texas under our Constitution.
So how much of your process is art versus science in terms of controlling taste? And I mean, do you have a person that's your taster that like assures that the quality from batch to batch is the same, or is it more just a chemical process, or you're just looking at data to create?
I mean, I don't know really how to weigh the two. I mean, they're both involved. I mean, certainly if you track all your variables and your inputs and work really hard to keep those the same, in theory your beer should taste the same. And typically if you're having an issue, one of those will be out of whack. But we do taste every single batch of beer, and there's several points at which it gets tasted. But like the last point is like the shift leader, the packaging team, when you bring that beer into the bottle filler, the can filler, the kegging line, one of the things they're charged with doing is tasting the beer there at on the line. And part of it is just to make sure that somebody didn't hook up to the wrong tank also. Not saying that's ever happened, but taste is a critical thing. Every Friday, And it's interesting, people make jokes about, ah, what a great job. You know, you guys just sit around and taste beer all day, especially if people come in and see us tasting beer. Tasting beer when it's work is just that, it is work. And it's actually not a lot of fun because you're trying to pick it apart and find all the flaws. You're not sitting around just, you know, sitting with your friend and drinking beer. I'm going to turn this over to you for just a second.
Sure.
We have time for probably about one more question.
Another question? I can tell you, I'm involved in the beer judge certification program as a Grand Master, and I judge contests, beer contests, and it's a lot of work. Because you can't just taste a beer and go 27 out of 50 points. You've got to go down a score sheet and make comments to justify why you're scoring not just the general score, but you're breaking the beer down into aroma bouquet, what is the color right? Is the beer clear? How's the head on the beer? What is it like on your palate? What's the aftertaste like? Things like that. So judging and scoring beers over, you know, if you're doing 10 beers, it could take you the better part of an hour just to evaluate these things, because people are submitting these beers for not just a score. They want to get feedback on their beers to see how they can improve them. So, yeah, it's important. It's not just drinking it and putting a number down. So.
I apologize, by the way. I had a burglar alarm going off at my house that went off right before I came up here, so slightly distracted. My dog is probably not very happy at home right now. Hopefully they didn't steal her. All right.
Anyone else have a question? Or we have time for one more right up here.
Okay. Does beer really have a shelf life?
Absolutely.
Is there a difference between canned beer, bottled beer, and keg beer?
So shelf life, yes. Now it's not like milk where one day you can drink it and the next day it's chunky.
Yeah.
It's just a gentle decline. If you keep it cold, it'll stay fresh longer. But really, it's best the second it leaves the bottling line.
There are exceptions if you're producing beers that are exceptionally strong, barley wines, imperial stouts, things that get into the 9, 10, 11, 12% range. Those actually can be cellared like wine, and they will actually change and develop with age. That doesn't mean they're not good as soon as you buy them, but they will taste different after a year or two.
Yeah, but you can see the canning date if you just look right on the bottom. So this was canned on April 5th. So we don't code it or anything. And yes, the difference between bottles, cans, and kegs is bottled beer is in a bottle, canned beer is in a can, and draft beer is in a keg. That's actually the difference. I mean, literally, it's coming out of the same big tank, and depending whether they hook the hose to which filling line, that's just where the beer is going. So there's no real difference. Now, cans have the advantage of there's no light that can get into them. The disadvantage is they have a BPA liner inside of them. Glass is completely inert. Brown glass does a pretty good job of filtering UV rays. Clear and green do not filter UV rays. Draft is a great way to serve beer, but only if the people know how to handle draft and keep the beer lines clean.
And move through
it fairly quickly. So draft will actually probably be the freshest if it's done perfectly. But like we work really hard on our beers to keep them really fresh, especially on things like Art Car IPA, the very hoppy beers like Art Car. You really want to drink those fresh.
You said you were going to say something about plastic earlier.
Oh, plastic. So plastic, like those water bottles, they're CO2 impermeable, but they're O2 permeable. So a CO2 molecule is much larger than an O2 molecule. And we're really, so that's why Coke can be in a plastic bottle, but beer cannot be. And it's interesting. I was working on technology where they have layers, but the problem with those, those two blow molded bottles is you have something that looks sort of like a plastic test tube, and then it gets heated up, and then a mold closes on it, and they inject it with air, and it just inflates like a balloon into the mold. But we tried to do layers to have something that was oxygen impermeable, but it would never expand at the same rate as the other plastics. So, long story short, the only plastic bottles you'll ever see will end up being incredibly thick, and they're not cost effective in any way. And you used to see them sometimes at stadiums, but stadiums have gone away from them. Also.
We sell them, but we sell them mostly for people that want to make homebrew to take to the swimming pool or take to the beach, and those are short term. You know, put them in the bottles, drink them within a couple of months.
Well, let's give Brock and Scott a round of applause for their great comments. Hopefully everyone found this session to be intriguing and educational, a fun educational program as part of the Classroom Connect experience this year. And so the day's not done. The final thing that you have, the brand new building that's right across the way over there, that's the state-of-the-art Moody Center for the Art that just opened a couple months ago. And so that building is open until 5 o'clock today. And so we purposely ended today around 4:15 or so. So you have a little under an hour, but if you haven't been over there, it's a spectacular building. There are a variety of different arts exhibits and displays that are open, and they have some docents over there. It's independent on your own. There aren't organized group tours or anything like that. And so you can just kind of meander over there at your leisure. But then also, right outside on this patio right here, we also have a reception set up and ready. So there's a variety of hors d'oeuvres, wine, more beer, soft drinks, water. And so just know that you cannot take food or beverage into the Moody Center. And so they close at 5. The reception will go until about 5:30. So just be aware of that as you're timing how you want to end your day here. And then, as we said in that email, the parking is complimentary. So if you did not pick up a validation when you arrived here and checked in at the registration table, just make sure that you stop by there, and we'll give you a validation that you can insert into the machine upon your exit from the parking lot, so that your credit card isn't charged. And there will be staff up here at the registration table, so if you have any questions, feel free to track us down. But we hope that you enjoyed your day. This will be the last time you hear from anyone, so enjoy the arts, Moody Center for the Arts.